The first time you read Twilight, you don't think you're reading about fear. You think it's about love, the intoxicating, all-consuming, glittering kind that feels like destiny. But if you stay long enough in its quiet moments, beneath the rain of Forks, Washington, you begin to realize it's a story about being afraid. Afraid of time. Afraid of loss. Afraid of wanting something that might destroy you. That's the strange beauty of Stephenie Meyer's world. It wraps danger in romance, and somehow makes you ache for both. Bella Swan isn't just a girl in love with a vampire. She's a human learning what it means to desire eternity. She looks at Edward Cullen and sees not death, but freedom. He looks at her and sees not life, but temptation. Together they stand in that impossible space between hunger and grace. When I think of Bella, I don't see weakness, as many critics did. I see a kind of courage most of us never admit to, having the courage to surrender. To say, I love something that terrifies me, and I will step toward it anyway. That's not passivity. That's faith, raw and reckless. It's the same faith that drives every tragic heroine from literature: Juliet, Catherine Earnshaw, even Anna Karenina, all believing that love can redeem what it inevitably ruins. The irony is that Edward, the immortal, is the one terrified of change. He has eternity, and yet he clings to control. Bella has nothing but time, and yet she spends it recklessly, as if she already knows the clock is ticking. That inversion is what gives Twilight its strange gravity. The mortal acts immortal, and the immortal acts afraid. It's not about choosing between life and death, it's about choosing what kind of fear you're willing to live with. People mocked the sparkling vampires, but the metaphor is sharper than it looks. The sparkle isn't vanity, it's exposure. Edward can't hide what he is in the sunlight. The shimmer is both beautiful and damning. Love works like that too. When someone truly sees you, every flaw glows. You become luminous and vulnerable at once. Forks itself becomes a metaphor for the heart, gray, overcast, forever on the edge of a storm. Meyer's prose may be simple, but it captures a truth few romantic fantasies dare to, that love is not light. It's the shadow cast by it. The tension of wanting and fearing, of drawing close and pulling away, that's the pulse of the entire saga. The first book isn't about love realized. It's about love discovered, questioned, tested against reason. Edward's restraint isn't romantic, it's moral exhaustion. Every moment with Bella is a choice between hunger and humanity. That's what makes him compelling. He's not just a fantasy boyfriend. He's the embodiment of conscience. He is desire constantly interrupted by self-awareness. And Bella? She doesn't want safety. She wants significance. She wants to matter in a universe that treats her as ordinary. That's what makes her relatable, especially for young readers. It's not that she wants a vampire, it's that she wants to be chosen, to be seen in a world that doesn't expect her to exist loudly. Edward's love gives her that, but at a price. She must risk herself to keep it. Their story becomes a mirror for how we love when we're young. The way we mistake obsession for destiny. The way we think forever means safety, when it really means surrender. The way we chase the kind of love that consumes us, because we'd rather burn than fade quietly. And yet, beneath all the melodrama, there's something tender about it. The way Edward watches Bella sleep, not as a predator, but as someone terrified of what he might ruin. The way Bella reaches toward the danger, not out of rebellion, but recognition. They complete a circle of fear and devotion, one trying not to destroy, the other trying not to disappear. You can laugh at it, sure. But the reason Twilight worked, why it caught a generation in its gravity, is because it made the forbidden feel sacred. It whispered to a world of readers that love, even dangerous love, is still worth the risk. And maybe that's why we kept reading. Not for the vampires or the powers, but for the ache of being seen, because deep down, Twilight isn't a love story. It's a meditation on mortality. It's about what we do when we realize everything we love will end and choosing to love it anyway. There's a moment in New Moon when the story stops being about love and becomes about absence. Edward leaves, and suddenly the air goes out of the book. You feel it even in the pacing. Pages that used to hum now fall silent. It's one of the boldest moves in a romance story, to take away the thing we thought was the center and see what's left. Bella breaks. And not the poetic kind of break, the quiet, invisible collapse that happens when you lose the gravity holding your world together. Meyer doesn't romanticize this grief. She lets it sit, slow and dull. The months pass as empty pages. No dialogue, no sound, just the ache of routine. It's the closest thing young adult fiction has ever come to depression rendered honestly. We often talk about love stories, but New Moon is a story about the echo that follows love. The silence after someone says goodbye. The strange half-life that begins when you realize the world doesn't stop just because your heart did. Bella doesn't just lose Edward, she loses the reflection of herself that existed in his gaze. And what's left is frightening. A self she doesn't recognize. That's why Jacob enters not as a replacement, but as a mirror. He represents warmth, movement, sunlight. He's everything Edward isn't: alive, impulsive, human. But more than that, Jacob is the reminder that life continues. His laughter pulls color back into the gray. His friendship is a pulse returning to a body that thought it had died. And yet, the tragedy of New Moon isn't the love triangle, it's the impossibility of healing completely. Jacob is a door back to the living world, but Bella can't fully walk through it. She's haunted, not by Edward's presence, but by his absence. Every heartbeat feels like betrayal. That's what loss does, it teaches you that moving on isn't forgetting. It's learning to breathe around the missing piece. The cliff dive scene is one of the most misunderstood in the entire saga. People called it melodrama, but it's not about death, it's about desperation to feel something again. After months of numbness, the rush of cold water is almost holy. It's not a suicide attempt. It's a resurrection. For a brief second, Bella hears Edward's voice, not because he's there, but because her mind has found a way to survive through illusion. It's devastating and profoundly human. New Moon is about the cost of love when it becomes identity. Edward's absence forces Bella to confront who she is without him. And what she finds is both frightening and freeing, that she can exist, laugh, even dream again, without needing to be chosen. That realization doesn't erase her love, it makes it real. Because love without freedom is just fear wearing a prettier dress. The werewolves enter as a kind of counterpoint to the Cullens. Where vampires are frozen in time, the wolves are bound to change. They embody everything Edward resists: instinct, heat, impermanence. They remind us that being alive means losing control sometimes. That sometimes transformation hurts, but still means growth. Jacob's love is the love of the living, messy, loud, and warm. Edward's is the love of the eternal, beautiful, quiet, and terrifying. And Bella stands between them, the bridge between mortality and eternity. That's what New Moon really is, a meditation on what it means to be human among immortals. To hurt and heal in real time while the rest of the world refuses to change. There's a line that always stays with me when Edward tells Bella later, "You're my life now." It sounds romantic, but after New Moon, it feels heavier. Because we've seen what happens when someone makes another person their entire world. It's devotion, yes, but also danger. Love that deep must learn boundaries, or it consumes both souls. When Edward returns, it's not the same love. It's older, quieter, layered with the knowledge that absence doesn't erase connection, it reveals it. The reunion isn't fireworks. It's relief. Two people who've walked through separate darkness finding each other not as fantasy, but as survivors. In the end, New Moon teaches something most stories are too afraid to say, that losing someone doesn't mean losing everything. That sometimes, the only way to understand love is to live through its silence. And that healing, however slow, is its own kind of magic, because the truth is, we don't learn who we are when someone loves us. We learn it when they leave. If Twilight was discovery and New Moon was loss, then Eclipse is decision. It's the book where Bella stops being a girl in love and starts becoming a woman who understands what love costs. Every chapter feels like standing between two mirrors, Jacob on one side, Edward on the other, each reflecting a different version of the life she could live. Edward is control, stillness, a love that promises protection from everything, even from herself. Jacob is warmth, movement, chaos, a love that asks her to risk being hurt because it's alive. Eclipse turns that triangle into something more complex than rivalry. It's a meditation on what kind of person you become depending on who you love. What I've always admired about this book is that it finally admits what the saga had been circling all along: love is not one thing. It's not always noble, or safe, or even kind. Sometimes love is selfish, desperate, contradictory. Bella's heart is pulled in two directions because both represent truths about her. Edward is her longing for permanence. Jacob is her instinct to stay human. The tragedy is that she can't be both. That's what makes Eclipse more than just a romance, it's an allegory about identity. Every choice Bella makes is a declaration of who she believes she is and who she's willing to become. To choose Edward is to embrace transformation, to abandon her humanity in exchange for transcendence. To choose Jacob is to remain rooted in the mortal world, where love means aging, losing, and letting go. The irony is that both men love her enough to want her safe, and both misunderstand what safety means to her. She doesn't want a love that cages her in glass. She wants one that sees her as capable of standing in the fire. That's the difference between protection and partnership. And Eclipse is where she learns it. One of the most powerful scenes is when Edward and Jacob, enemies by nature, sit together in the tent during the blizzard. Bella, asleep between them, doesn't realize she's the embodiment of the balance they can't find. Edward's cold and Jacob's warmth, life and death both keeping her alive. That's not just love. That's symbolism at its most tender. It's the world saying that even opposites can coexist when they stop fighting to win. It's also where we finally see Edward's evolution. He stops trying to control fate and starts respecting Bella's choice, even when it terrifies him. That moment, his decision to let her choose freely, is more romantic than any kiss in the series. Because love, when it matures, becomes less about possession and more about permission. Jacob's love, meanwhile, is a lesson in unrequited devotion. He fights not to win Bella, but to prove she deserves something real, something human. His heartbreak is the show's conscience. It reminds us that not all love stories are meant to be fulfilled. Some exist to teach us what we can survive. What makes Eclipse special is that it stops treating immortality like a fantasy and starts treating it like a consequence. Bella's choice isn't about who she loves more, it's about what she's willing to sacrifice for the idea of forever. Becoming a vampire means losing the messy beauty of being human. Laughter that fades, warmth that ends, pain that reminds you you're alive. Immortality sounds perfect until you realize it's also static. No growth, no decay, just endless repetition. But Bella's decision to embrace that eternity isn't naive. It's a philosophical one. She's not rejecting humanity. She's redefining it. For her, love itself becomes the form of immortality worth dying for. It's tragic, yes, but also profoundly human to reach for something bigger than yourself. Even if it burns, when she finally tells Jacob goodbye, it's one of the quietest and most honest moments in the series. There's no villain, no betrayal, just inevitability. The kind of heartbreak that doesn't explode, but settles like ash. That's how most endings really happen, not with drama, but with understanding. By the end of Eclipse, Bella stands at the threshold of transformation. She's ready to lose her pulse for the sake of meaning. And while we can debate whether that's love or delusion, what matters is that it's choice. Her choice. The power that began as surrender has become agency. That's what makes this chapter of the saga so meaningful, not who she ends up with, but who she becomes because of it. Eclipse teaches that every love story is also a story of identity. That who we choose is a reflection of who we believe we are. And sometimes, saying yes to one love means saying goodbye to every version of yourself that existed before it. Because love, real love, always asks something of you. And if it doesn't change you, it wasn't love, it was comfort. Breaking Dawn begins where every fairy tale usually ends, with the wedding. But in Twilight, marriage isn't a conclusion. It's the start of something much darker, stranger, and more profound. Bella finally gets everything she wanted: Edward, immortality, forever. And immediately, the story asks, are you sure you still want it? That's the quiet genius of Breaking Dawn. It turns fantasy into responsibility, love into consequence. Bella's transformation isn't just physical, it's moral. She's no longer chasing eternity for romance. She's living through what eternity actually costs: The first half of the book is unsettling, almost uncomfortable. Bella's pregnancy feels like a metaphor for the kind of love that consumes the self. Her body changes, cracks, breaks, and yet she clings to it with the fierce calm of someone who has finally found purpose. Critics called it extreme, even disturbing, but maybe that's the point. Motherhood, creation, sacrifice, they're all terrifying in their own way. The story doesn't glorify the pain. It confronts it, and Edward, so used to control, finally meets something he can't protect her from. For the first time, he's powerless. That reversal is necessary. Because only in losing control does he learn to love without fear. To trust that love can survive pain. To let Bella define her own boundaries. In that sense, Breaking Dawn is less about supernatural power and more about the balance of love and autonomy. Bella's choice to keep the child, even when everyone tells her not to, is the moment she becomes truly immortal, not because her body will live forever, but because she chooses conviction over comfort. She's not reckless anymore. She's resolute. It's a quiet evolution from the girl who followed to the woman who leads. When she finally turns into a vampire, the irony is perfect. She's never been more alive. All her senses open, every color sharper, every sound clearer. The world becomes unbearable in its beauty. It's not just transformation, it's revelation. And unlike Edward, she doesn't view her power as curse but as calling. For her, eternity isn't punishment. It's potential. That's what separates Breaking Dawn from most supernatural stories. It treats immortality as a second adolescence. You're reborn, yes, but you still have to learn how to live. Bella's strength isn't in her speed or her shield. It's in her clarity. For the first time in the entire series, she isn't defined by fear. Not of time, not of loss, not even of death. The light that once blinded her now burns calmly within her. The relationship between Bella and Edward changes too. It matures. Their love stops being about worship and becomes about partnership. They argue, they protect, they learn. The fantasy fades, but the bond deepens. It's not about him saving her anymore, it's about them saving each other. And then there's Jacob. His imprinting on Renesmee shocked readers, but beneath the strangeness lies an unexpected symmetry. The story that began with rivalry ends with connection. The wolf and the vampire, once destined to destroy each other, become family. It's absurd, yes, but also symbolic. The cycle of violence finally breaks. The eternal war between instinct and restraint ends in coexistence. The final confrontation when the Cullens and their allies stand before the Volturi isn't a battle. It's a choice. There's no bloodshed, no death, just truth. Bella's shield becomes the ultimate metaphor for love that protects without destroying. It's compassion turned into power. She wins not by fighting harder, but by understanding deeper. And that's why Breaking Dawn feels less like a finale and more like transcendence. Every fear from the first book, mortality, vulnerability, the fragility of love, finds its answer here. Not in victory, but in understanding. Bella becomes what Edward feared most, powerful, immortal, unstoppable, and yet, she remains herself. The human heart inside the immortal body. In the end, when she lets Edward finally read her thoughts, it's the most intimate moment in the entire saga. After years of being the one exposed, she opens her mind voluntarily. "Now you know," she says. And in that simple act, the series comes full circle, from secrecy to transparency, from obsession to equality. That's what Breaking Dawn is really about, the light after the storm. The realization that love, once matured, doesn't consume, it illuminates. The saga ends not with tragedy, but with quiet triumph. Not a shout, but a whisper. Love endures. Fear fades. And the light that burns in the dark? It was never supernatural. It was always human. When the saga ends, the silence it leaves behind is soft, not empty, but peaceful. Twilight begins with a heartbeat and ends with eternity. But what lingers is not the fantasy. It's the mirror it holds up to our own humanity. The story was never just about vampires and werewolves. It was about light, the kind that burns quietly inside fear and keeps us moving through the dark. People laughed at Twilight, called it melodrama, teenage fantasy, a guilty pleasure. But underneath the glitter and longing, it asked the oldest question in the world: what are we willing to give up for love, and what should we never surrender? It's easy to dismiss the story's obsession, but it's harder to admit that we've all been there, standing in the middle of something we can't explain, torn between safety and desire, between reason and the ache that refuses to fade. Bella's journey, when you strip away the supernatural, is the story of growing up. She begins as a girl who wants to be seen, and she ends as a woman who finally sees herself. Her immortality isn't a reward. It's a metaphor for self-acceptance. Once she stops fearing who she could become, she becomes unstoppable. That's why the saga still resonates. It's about transformation, not perfection. Edward represents the fear that love might destroy us. Jacob represents the hope that it might save us. Bella stands between them, learning that both can be true. That's what real love is: dangerous and divine, terrifying and tender. It's not about choosing between light and dark. It's about learning how to hold both without losing yourself. Critics wanted Twilight to be logical. But love isn't logical, it's elemental. The same way a moth flies toward a flame knowing it will burn, we fall toward the things that make us feel alive. What matters isn't the fall. It's what we learn when we hit the ground and decide to rise anyway. When Bella tells Edward, forever, it's not a promise, it's a prayer. Not for time without end, but for meaning that doesn't fade. Because the truth is, immortality without love is just an endless night. What makes their forever bearable is that it began in mortality. It's the memory of fragility that keeps it pure. Each book in the saga carries a different kind of light. Twilight glows with first love, the spark of discovery. New moon flickers with lost, the dim light that refuses to go out. Eclipse burns hot with choice, the painful clarity of growing up. Breaking dawn shines steady, the glow of acceptance after the storm. Together they form a constellation, a map of how love matures from hunger to peace, and perhaps that's why we return to it, even years later. Not because of vampires or forbidden romance, but because it reminds us of a version of ourselves we once were: fearless, foolish, and completely alive. We read it now with distance and tenderness. The way we look back on old letters and realize that, even if we've changed, the feelings were real. The saga's greatest message hides behind its fantasy, that love isn't meant to save you, it's meant to reveal you. To show what you value, what you fear, what you're willing to fight for. It doesn't fix you. It unmasks you. And once you've seen yourself clearly, there's no going back. When Bella finally lets Edward read her mind at the end, she's not saying, now you know me, she's saying, now I know myself. That moment, simple, quiet, luminous, is the real ending. Because true love doesn't need forever to feel infinite. It just needs one moment of absolute understanding. So maybe Twilight isn't about supernatural romance at all. Maybe it's about how we learn to live with desire and still remain whole. How we face fear without letting it rule us. How we find meaning in things that might not make sense to anyone else. The story closes like dusk, soft, inevitable, and filled with that strange blue light that means both ending and beginning. And in that glow, you realize something. Every love, every heartbreak, every transformation leaves behind a little spark. A reminder that, once, you felt something so powerful it changed how you see the world. That spark is what we keep. That's the light that burns in the dark.